We are here with Dr. Kenneth, Dr. Kenneth Shockley, Dr. Kmt Shockley,
Yes.
a profound scholar who is engaged in the process of making sure that our children, our education systems are actually elevating the consciousness of African and or Black children. And so we're honored to have him. He's at the University of Houston doing great work. He's all over the world doing work. I came in contact with him physically when we worked at Howard University together. Dr. Shockley, welcome to the Pan-African Leadership Conference.
It's an honor to be here, Dr. Washington. Thank you so much for inviting me. And whenever we're doing Pan-African work, we're doing the real work that our predecessors like John Henrik Clark and Asa Hilliard wanted us to do. So this is important work, and I'm very, very pleased to have been invited onto your platform.
Amen. Thank you for accepting. This is the brain child of Daniel Mabonu. The Pan-African Leadership Conference is where we come together. We bring African minds together to look to solve African issues on a Pan-African level. So, Dr. Shockley, talk to us about the work that you've been doing. You are a scholar. You talk about academics and children knowing who they are in the context of education. Talk about the work that you're doing, what you're doing now, and your past research.
Sure. So for the past, I would say maybe 17 to 18 years, I have been focused on trying to figure out ways to help our young people and help the people that work with, such as school leaders, and teach our young people to deal with the consciousness manipulation that we are currently experiencing. So we're currently in a situation where we have replaced our natural African way of thinking, our natural selves, with a foreign and alienating self. And so for 18 or 19 years now, my work has been researching the people who are trying to make a difference for our young people by bringing an African consciousness and moving our young people into an African paradigm from the foreign and alienating Eurocentric paradigm into a healthier place in their thinking. So many of the people who are in leadership in this work are about correcting history and trying to heal our people from the devastating effects of what Maremba Ani calls the Ma'afa, the period of complete and total destruction, which we are currently still in. So we're still in a major war that was waged against us, this particular version of that war starting in around the 1500s with the enslavement of our ancestors. So the work that I'm doing is just, first of all, charting what it is that our folks are doing who are engaged in African centered education, which again is an important healing mechanism for us. The other thing that I've been doing is figuring out ways to capture some of this work on film. So I started off a couple of years ago with one of my doctoral students, Kofi Laniles, creating a documentary on the Maroons. So we did a documentary that went all around the world and went to various film festivals. It had rave reviews at the film festivals, talking about the Maroon. I mean, and one of my mentors before he passed away was Asa Hilliard. He wrote this book, The Maroon Within Us, and we were inspired to create this documentary to really look at what that means to have a maroon within you. It means to have that, as they say in the place where we did the documentary, it's Colombia, South America, that luchador, which is the Spanish word that means that fighter, to have that fighter within us. And so we wanted to document what they were doing at the school there and what they were doing in their society. We've published several articles from that work. And so I'm now working on a second documentary. It is called Cultural War, Focus on Black Youth. So what I'm looking at in that documentary is the war that has been waged against our people and our youth, and trying to supply some solutions and some things that parents can think about and community members should be thinking about to make things better for our young people. If people are interested in that, they can go to culturalwarfilm.com. If you subscribe, you'll have a chance to be kept up to speed on when things are coming out. That film should come out within the next couple of months. So those are some of the things I've been doing, is researching African-centered education. And I'm still doing research on African-centered education. I've had several publications over the last few years related to that. And what I'm doing now, and what has kept me very busy, is working on this documentary that is focused on the cultural war that's been waged against our youth.
All right, I want to back up to something, right? That powerful word. You started off by talking about consciousness manipulation, right? So, and indeed, we both have been shaped by various thinkers, and Dr. Asa Hilliard was one of course, my jegnas or mentors that shaped my thinking about how we do this work. And the maroon within us is indeed a powerful book. Let's go back to consciousness manipulation, because he talked about this as well, about how we the issue of education and how we are miseducated. And so talk about this. What do you mean when you say consciousness manipulation?
Mm-hmm. That actually what is happening is that the consciousness of if you think of consciousness in the sense of being the difference between being asleep and being awoke, when you're either partly or fully conscious or not fully conscious. What is happening is that our young people are being trained in such a way that they stay unconscious as it relates to what they should be doing, so that we can move ourselves forward along our own historical trajectory. So what we're doing currently is operating inside of the historical trajectory of a different group of people, namely Europeans. So we're on a white supremacist, Eurocentric historical trajectory, which represents for us being asleep or unconscious to our own historical trajectory. Almost the same as if somebody were to come into your house and just take away from your mind, your consciousness, your understanding, your being, all of the things that are important for you to do, and instead get you to begin thinking about and only doing the things that they want you to do for them. So you've lost your sense of direction and been knocked off your cultural track, knocked off your cultural kilter, and are now operating to the beat of somebody else's drum. So in order for the white supremacists to maintain the superiority that they have over us, we have to be limited in what we understand to be the borders of our possibility. If they can get us to think in such a way that the borders of our possibility are what they have told us they are, then we'll never be able to be conscious again. We'll always be unconscious to our own needs and interests, and conscious to theirs. So they control the historical narrative, which is impacting our consciousness. And so what the Afrocentric education scholars and leaders and practitioners are trying to do is to regain control of the historical narrative. And psychologists such as yourself and Amos Wilson and you name the pantheon of great psychologists, Asa Hilliard, it's hard, Francis Welsing as a psychiatrist, my mentor, Dr. Patricia Newton. What they have been trying to do is what all of us in education and psychology, et cetera, is to get us to become conscious and wake up from the deep sleep that we're in as a result of what has happened to us during the Maafa.
So this idea of waking up, right, being woke, and I think that your work is doing that, right? It is part of the awakening. People often talk about the term stay woke, and woke is a past participle in the present about the future, which is so heavy. It speaks to the African worldview that I can speak about the past in the present, about things that are forthcoming. And so this idea of wokeness is important, is imperative, and that our being sleep to who we are benefits the oppressor more so than it benefits us, and as a result, then we serve others. A powerful piece, and you said that we must change our historical trajectory by changing the understanding of who we are. The work that you're doing, go ahead, comment on that. You want to comment on that? I'm a back off.
Well, basically, I was just saying that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the goal of the work really is to get us to a place where we're understanding the importance of cultural sovereignty and sovereignty in our thinking. Was really the Maroon example. There's a great piece that's written by a guy named Uhuru Hotep. It's called the Maroon. It's called Understanding. So Hilliard's book is talking about this notion that the first place that we must be free is in the mind. And I agree with the psychologists, the Black psychologists, when they say that. And I've spent a lot of time around Black psychologists, listening to them and being mentored by them, including Naeem Akbar when I was young. And so I was able to take in a lot of information about the first step of our freedom coming from that mental place, that getting free first psychologically. So what I think has been important in the work that I've done is to try to bring some of those teachings and some of those understandings to the field of education, where it is largely rejected. And the reason why it's rejected is because the people who are the gatekeepers in the field of education know that we are really dealing with the most important aspect within our society, and that is our young people. We're really talking about a war, because they know that if we're able to get at our young people and change the way they think about what reality is, and change the way they think about themselves. Again, if we can enlarge the borders of who they think they are, they know that they will lose. Not only will they lose in the U.S. school system, they will lose this entire war. If we're able to get our young people where we want them, the game is over. So what they do is they work very hard to distract us from that by funding only those things that will distract us into thinking we're doing the work, like doing a bunch of race work, as opposed to building the culture work that we should be building. A lot of Black scholars in education are distracted by that. Another thing that they are doing is making sure that African centered education and anything close to being like it are kept on the margins. When they saw critical race theorists beginning to talk more about culture, that's when you started to see them attacking critical race theory, which is really they're upset about critical race theory because they know that's the piece that's about correcting our history and giving us a chance to heal. So as it is currently thought of in critical race theory, it has not really been situated in such a way that we can use it to heal, but it was kind of headed in that direction. Some of the scholars having been trained and been steeped in African-centered thinking, like Gloria Ladson Billings, who really kind of came from the African-centered camp. They know that this is an important place to maintain the status quo for the education system. This is the reason why people may think that education is big yellow buses and apples for the teacher and all that kind of innocent stuff, but really it's a mighty battle being fought in the field of education at the K-12 level. And we need as much attention as we can get to be placed on what's happening within the schools, because that's where our future is. Even if grandma and grandpa never knew who Imhotep was, they never knew who Zoser was, they never knew anything about Hatshepsut, they never knew Queen Nzinga, they never knew Prempeh, they never knew these things. We're learning those things, and we're trying to pass those things to our young people, and it will be over their dead bodies. They do not want it done.
The basis of all knowledge is self-knowledge. That's what they said in ancient Kemet or Egypt. And so what you're talking about here is self-knowledge. We're here with Dr. Kmt Shockley, professor around the issue of education, educating our children, and we're talking about the war, the war of for the minds of Black people, and we understand the importance and relevance of education. The word education comes from a Latin word educe, which means to bring out that which is already there. And so what we talk about then is what happens to a population when they begin to have the borders of their identity limited by their oppressor. And so they begin to serve the oppressor. And I think Minister Farrakhan talks about prescribing the parameters of your existence, right? So, education is one of those key tools. Dr. Shockley is engaged in the process of elevating consciousness for our children, for ourselves, or for adults. And he's done a documentary. Tell us about the documentary that you went down into South America and you found, you talked about African people that exist there. We don't even know that narrative, right? That we exist in these spaces. Talk about that, and then we'll slide into the maroon conversation.
One of the things that's so interesting is when you look at the curricula that have been developed in the U.S. school systems is that they leave out almost all of African history, and then they lie about European or white history. So what we have is omission and commission. And as a result of the omissions and commissions, what we have is miseducation. And that's what Carter G. Woodson speaks about so eloquently in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro. It causes us to do strange things like cut out a back door where there isn't one, figuratively speaking, so that we can walk through it. That's what the miseducation system does. It creates people who like and appreciate and love their oppressor and have a sort of, what is that called, a Stockholm syndrome-like relationship with their oppressor, but they hate themselves. One of the most important missing pieces from the education of our young people is understanding maroonage. So maroons are people who escaped from, or because of their own strength, were able to completely avoid being enslaved on plantations during the so-called Middle Passage, or the Ma'afa. So they weren't able to get these folks onto plantations, or they weren't able to get them to stay on the plantations. The Maroons escaped from the plantations and went into the hills, and usually into swampy areas or far up into the hills, to get away from the oppressive white enslavers. And while there, reestablished their African culture. And just a quick aside, that's the kind of work that African-centered leaders are trying to get to happen in our schools. We're trying to give our young people a maroon mentality. So no matter where you are, no matter where you exist at any given time, you are thinking of the sovereignty that's needed to control the psychic and physical space around you, as Kwame Akoto would say. So when you look at these maroon places that were established all throughout the Americas, starting in the 1600s, the very first one was Palenque, San Basilio, which is in Colombia, South America. What we found is that these places were established, and some of them actually still exist. Palenque, the very first one, actually still exists. Of course, there's some things that have changed, but they still see themselves, again, as luchadors, as great fighters. And so you'll find that the mentality of the people in Palenque is, they still have this feeling that they are the representatives of Black freedom and independence for the world. They still believe that in the order of the ancestors. They still believe that in protecting the young people. They still practice what we would think of as being the sort of principles of Ma'at, Nguzo Saba. So they use those kinds of ideologies and value systems to establish the village that they have. And they still operate in a way that is like that. One of the reasons they've been able to do that is because for about 200 years, they didn't allow anybody from the outside to come into the village. And then maybe about 60 years ago, they started allowing people to come into the village, which is how we gained access. My former graduate student's wife is from Colombia, and that helped us gain some access into that village. But what they're trying to do in the village, now that they've opened up their doors, is to maintain that which they've had for so long. And one of the unfortunate things that has happened in that village, and this is after, we did our documentary on them, is that they've allowed too many Europeans to come into the village, and they've now built a cell phone tower in that village. They are also actively trying to recruit one of the great. There's a music form that was created that the Palenque people created called rap folklore Palenque, taking after the rap that was established here in the United States by Black people here. Rap folklore Palenque is a very positive form of rap. They talk about the village. They talk about the things that are happening with their people there. And they just tell stories about life as a Palenquero, as they call it. The Europeans are trying to recruit the lead rap folklore Palenque musician. And I spoke to him about this, and that, you're going to start to see them trying to throw money his direction and doing things that I know where they're leading, but because they're in that village and have been protected from white supremacy in many ways for so long, they don't understand the vicissitudes of white supremacy. And so I've been sitting down along with my former graduate student, talking to these folks, sitting in a circle about how the system of white supremacy works and why they might want to be much more careful about who they allow into the village. And I'll just give you another example of something that I saw in the village. And these are things that would be new to them. There was a woman from the capital of Colombia, Bogota. She was from Bogota, a white woman who was in the village smoking a cigarette. People don't smoke cigarettes in that village, but they were curious about this cigarette that she was smoking. The thing that this woman was doing was what we would recognize as being trying to mac in the village with the Palenqueros. And we tried to explain to the Palenqueros the harmful effects of Europeans coming into your space and trying to date and have relations with the men in the village, which is what has started to occur. And I saw it first with her. I asked her to put her cigarette out and to leave. And she was surprised, but at the end of the day, she did not leave. She stayed there. But what we're seeing right now in 2022 is the beginning of the destruction of that place that we went to. So they've been around since the 1600s, but they don't understand that they can be taken out. And there's I hope it doesn't happen, but from things that I'm seeing, we're seeing the beginning of the end of that place with that phone tower, with the fact that they are able to recruit Palenqueros into the United States music industry, with the fact that their outsiders are able to come in and sort of have their way with Palenqueros. So I'm so glad we were able to do the documentary. The documentary is called For Humanity: Culture, Community, and Maroonage. It is available for free for anybody who wants to see it on YouTube. It did play on PBS It's actually, PBS still has a contract where they can play it anytime they want to for the next year, I believe. They've had it for 3 years, and it has played several times on PBS. And I think now it plays on the Washington, D.C. PBS affiliate for another year.
What's the name of it again?
It's called For Humanity, Culture, Community, and Maroonage. So if you see that video, if we were to do another documentary on the Paling Carols in a couple of years, I would imagine things would look different. So just the last thing I'll say about that particular part of it is that one of the things that has started to happen since the Europeans started coming into the village is conflict between the elders in the village and the young people in the village. Sounds familiar, sort of a divide and conquer, sort of a Willie Lynch kind of behavior. That wasn't happening before. So, people should study what they have, and we should really get up to these folks were able to establish something for themselves. It's a group of Black people. They haven't had a crime in that village since the 1980s. There's not a single person who's homeless. All of the children are accounted for. Wow. They have a 100% marriage rate among adults in that village.
Yes.
And that's an all Black place under attack. So please watch the documentary. And also do what you can, to try to help them understand what they have and how we need for that to be maintained.
Wow. So you talk about, you mentioned under attack, and you allude to warfare. One strategy of warfare for African people was to escape the oppressor and what became known as the Maroons, right? And we know that there's a Spanish take on the word cimarron, which meant runaway horse. And so when we talk about the Maroon concept, so go back to that, because that's where you earlier. Your second point was about the Maroon and the Maroon within, and so forth and so on. And you're talking about, again, warfare. So we're going to slide from this Maroon, this strategy of war, and to talk about that and what does that mean to be a Maroon. And then let's talk more about the strategies of war and what can we do as educators, as parents, to engage in this war actively and not be passive. So let's talk about the Maroon first up. So tell us, what do you mean when you say the Maroon of the Ma'afa?
Mm-hmm. So as I was saying, some of the people escaped into the villages, and these folks who escaped into the villages and escaped the system of white supremacy on the plantations are called Maroons. And as you were saying, the Spanish word cimarron really refers to those runaway folks who are out of their minds and are doing something that goes against the order. And so the Maroon is actually, those are the African people. You can look at the most famous Maroon, if you will, is Nanny of the Maroons, the Maroon leadership in Jamaica. But these are people who just would not accept enslavement. So they did a number of different things to make sure that they would not be re-enslaved. One, they camouflaged themselves. The Maroons were extraordinary warriors. So they were some of the first people to actually camouflage themselves. Like, for example, they would put a bush over their body. They would dress inside of a tree, for example, and then place themselves strategically within the bush. And when the Europeans would come in to try to re-enslave them, which happened all the time, they would pop out of the bush and kill the Europeans. So they had strategies such as hiding under the water. So they don't forget, they usually escaped to swampy areas. So you'd be in the water. Imagine the danger the Maroons would be in, hiding underneath the swampy water with the alligators. And when the Europeans would step into that water to get across so they could go and get the Maroons to re-enslave them, they take their head off. So they became, that's why they call themselves fighters and luchadors. It was not just because they're intellectually, but also physically fighting the white supremacists who were trying to re-enslave them. But we're talking really about the group of Black people who beat the white supremacists during the time of enslavement. And of course, then you have petite maroonage, or the Maroons who hid in the tall grasses in the Americas and established communities within the plantation itself. But the plantation owner didn't know they were there. So that's this concept of petite maroonage, being a maroon within the plantation, hidden away. I haven't studied that one, but I would like to. I think that's a very interesting concept and interesting behavior. But the Maroons, they are our example of African victory. And I think we couple that with the fact that most of the wars that have been fought by African people, waged against African people, since the very first one during the time of Narmer, have been things we've won. So I'm using this, thinking about that maroon, and then that maroonage, and then thinking about the wars that have been waged against us since around 3200 BC. Most of the wars that have been waged against African people have been won. We've won most of them. Most of them have included things like the Europeans and Asians coming into Kemet to try to enslave the people and losing those battles. And so I think our young people need to know about that. The Asians in 3000 BC, the people of Kemet versus the Europeans in 2000 BC. And you can find a bust of that in the British Museum, the example of that war. Dr. Chancellor Williams talks about these wars that we were engaged in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. And Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen talks about it in his book, The Black Man of the Nile and His Family. The fourth war episode, the people of Kemet versus Europeans in 1100 BC, winning that war with the help of mighty King Ramesses. And then finally, in around 990 BC, when the Arabs and the Europeans got together, was the first war that we lost. So I like to point out to our young people that the Maroons are not the only victorious African people in history, that most of the battles that have been waged against us, if you look at a timeline, have actually been won. So from 990 BC to 2022, we've really kind of been on the other side and more on the losing side. And with the particular war that started in the 1500s, when the Europeans came to enslave us, we're still inside of that war. So that hasn't been won or lost yet. Our job is to look at the Maroons as an example, look at the strategies that they use, study those strategies, think about how Ramesses and others that fought in wars, how did they win? And one of the things that will be in the documentary that I'm currently working on, again, that's going to be called Cultural War. And again, culturalwarfilm.com. If you subscribe, we're going to talk about things like this, and also talk about the war that's being waged on Black teachers so that they won't know these things. And then if they don't know them, then they can't teach them. This is we're at a critical moment here. We're really in a moment where the system of white supremacy was able to see the gains that were being made in African-centered education and in trying to make a difference for our young people, and they wanted to step in. They don't care about critical race theory. It's not about critical race theory. Critical race theory isn't the issue. The issue really is the gains that we've been making in the African-centered community, which really have to do with bringing African history to the schools. Now, they don't let those of us who are actually named African-centered researchers do any of that. Instead, what happens is over time, when the Black community is ignoring the African-centered people, then eventually they start to listen to the African-centered people. So people who are a little bit less qualified get opportunities to do professional developments with our teachers, make all kinds of money doing it. And I'm just telling you how it goes. So then they come in and they bring less African centered focus to the kids,
Okay.
etc. But yeah, okay, you don't want to go there. We'll go there.
Well,
I'm
no,
just telling you how it goes.
you speaking the truth there, right? The idea that I often wanted that same thing, right? Who gets to go into these spaces and make these conversations happen, and they make a lot of money because they have the very soft conversations, right? The one that they can tolerate. And this is also the understanding that of a strategy of war. And I think that if we don't understand that we're at war, and the Nation of Islam reminds us about this language of our open enemy, if we don't understand that we're at war for something, we will be destroyed every single time. People will come and they will listen to discussions of sensationalism. They will listen to discussions about financial development and listen to discussions about sex and relationships, but they won't listen to this kind of conversation. This conversation, where it says that, listen, if you understand what's on your mind, it can begin to redirect your entire behind. That's why Parliament Funkadelic says, free your mind and your behind will follow. That and Dr. and Jan Van Zant says that wherever you find your behind, your mind led you there. And so this is really a war of the mind, and education is critical because in this country, we know that education is compulsory until age 16, which means then by default, our children are being forced to go into an academic situation where they've been psychologically raped, they've been psychologically maimed, and we don't even understand how deep that is, right? That narrative of learning about your inferiority is a narrative that begins to strip one of their identity, their purpose, and their direction. And so, people, I want you to understand that here we are with Dr. Kmt Shockley talking about how do we reclaim our mind. He's talked about the work in South Central America, African reality, fighting for liberation against the oppressor. He's talked about fighting for liberation against the oppressor in Jamaica, and also we know about Boukman and IET. And also we talk about fighting for our liberation in this country intellectually. Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakanan, William Chandler. He has mentioned these scholars, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, Dr. Marimba Ani, and the concept of the Ma'afa, Dr. Naim Mahaba, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Wilson, Amos Wilson. He's mentioned all of these warriors who have been fighting for the liberation of African people, and we gloss over them with minimum concern. So I right now did an ancestral libation, ancestral call just then. I don't know if you heard what I just did, but we just poured libation, Ashe, for all of those scholars, those who have gone before us and who have fought this fight. Now, let's go back to this idea that we're at war, right? And fighting and warfare. And you already slid into the various strategies. So I just want to talk about, share more about the strategies. Your documentary is a strategy for success in this war. Talk about what can teachers do, what can parents do to help us win the war of the mind?
Great question. One of the things that is hard to deal with is the fact that the story, our story, the story of who we are, and the story of what really makes us who we are, is continuously being tampered with. So a lot of us now think, and I'm finding this out when I talk to organizations and groups, that many people think that our story is the imposition story. So the achievement gap. That's not our story. That's the thing that we're experiencing as a result of the system of white supremacy. That our story is our young people being killed in the streets. That's not our story. That's the imposition of the system of white supremacy. That what happened with Sandra Bland is our story. It's not our story. It's somebody else's doings, and it's causing us to have to respond and deal with it. But our actual story, I mean, just the same as a gazelle's story is not the imposition of the lion eating the gazelle. The gazelle have their own family, they have their pride, they have their group, and they have a history, and they're on a track. They have their own story. So trying to move the imposition story out of the way and put into place our actual cultural and historical story is actually much harder than one would think. Because a lot of people think that, a lot of people are thinking that the distractions actually that are being waged against us, if you will, are the Black story. So when you start to replace, and you have to do this with a lot of care and you have to do it strategically. So we talked about the strategies of the Maroon people in fighting in battle. Well, this particular battle of trying to get the information to our young people, it has to be done in a very with craft, and it has to be done with skill, because inside of folks is a lot of soreness. They're not sure, they don't know that the soreness is coming from being a victim in the system of white supremacy. They're just angry. 2 days ago, I think it was Thursday, I was talking to a group of Black 20-somethings who, some of them had just graduated from high school, but they were all in college. And I asked them to tell me stories about things that they experienced when they were in school. There were about 15 of them. All of them said things that I think a psychologist would have labeled as psychological trauma. But if you look at them, they don't necessarily look like they're in trauma. But when you start to talk to them, they sound like they're in trauma. So one of the things that our parents can do is to really make sure they're listening to our young people, that they are paying attention to the way that the school system treats them. One of the people that'll be in the documentary is going to be a young man who, when I was recording him in the documentary, his father was in the room, but his father didn't know what his son was going through in the school. His son was actually just being mistreated and mishandled in the school. People said he's on the baseball team, and his teammates call him nigger all the time. And when he goes up to bat, the guy behind the plate, sorry, I don't know baseball, former football player here, but the guy was saying something nig, like nig, and being taunted. He tells a story about being taunted in the school. I have a young person in the documentary who is going to be talking about a teacher hitting him in the head when nobody sees it. This is a thing that the teacher has been doing. The teacher's been hitting him. And the mom finally found out. And now actually that story may end up in the media, because it's such the way that this teacher was treating this student. You have to hear the story in the documentary. It's unbelievable the way that the teacher was just getting joy from hitting the student in the head. I also have some other things in the documentary where we're talking about the teacher who was kicking a Black kindergarten student. His white teacher's kicking the student, and it's actually caught on tape. I have another one of a white teacher who makes a student pick feces out of a toilet to clean the toilet. That teacher actually ended up getting fired, but it wasn't easy. And then there's so many. There's a story of an 18-year-old who was at a school who ends up raping a young Black student who is special needs. He rapes him with a hanger, a coat hanger, and I'm trying to actually get them on the documentary to talk about what they're going through, because what happened there actually is that it went to trial. And this young man, this 18-year-old man actually, who did this, got off scot-free, no charges. And so our young people are actually in schools being traumatized. All of all of the young people that I spoke to for this documentary, from teenagers to kids in the school-age kids, discuss the trauma they're actually experiencing in school, sometimes physical, sometimes mental, sometimes both. And I don't think we have a real good sense of what's going on with our young people in these schools. A resource officer choking. This is on tape. This one's on tape, just choking a young man and then using a taser on that kid. And you see the kid is just helpless, just being dragged around. And so I'm not sure that we understand that the school has become a battleground. It is a place where they're trying to put Black folks in their place, starting when they're young, so that when they're older, they'll know exactly how to behave. So what our community and our parents need to do is to get themselves, just to be a presence in the school. Because if you're not, things are going to happen to your child. I think that this is the reason that I've been compelled to create this documentary. The stories that I've been hearing as I go around the country, talking to different people about different things, and even trying to create this documentary, warrant that we have to be more involved in what's happening with our young people in the schools. They really are actually being traumatized in the schools. So I'm talking to the young people, but then I also the other day was, as I mentioned, was talking to a group of young 20s, 19-year-olds who just graduated, who are telling the stories about the trauma that they've experienced, and then talking about why they find themselves sometimes struggling in college. So this is a very serious situation, and I think that the way I'm trying to put the documentary together, I feel like I have to be responsible with this thing and really make sure that the Black community is made aware of what's happening to our young people in the schools. And also, I have people in the documentary talking about schools where such things would never happen. The schools where the kids are actually getting an African-centered education and where the students are protected. And just by way of example, one of the people who's in that documentary is Mwalimu Baruti. And he talks about how the very first order of business in his school in Atlanta is the safety of the young people. And he explains how he keeps them safe. So this is the project that I'm working on, and also the things I think we should do to keep our young people safe from harm.
Dr. Shockley, we've been getting comments from all over the world, from Guam. We had others as Canada. Paige Converse writes this, just as you mentioned Brother Baruti, which I thought was intriguing, as you mentioned him out of Georgia. She says, in Georgia, I saw a black boy forbidden to use the bathroom. He was suspended, and his mom brought him to get his homework. Can't use school facilities while you're suspended. This was 9 years ago. If I saw this now, I know I would stand for him. Bathrooms are for everyone. This is interesting how, again, the idea of war and anti-African thought and identity is prevalent. We have to understand that indeed the systems of oppression are through education. And Brother Baruti talks about how we have to control our own academic enterprise. And so we have, Kmt Shockley with Nation House up in Washington, D.C., and others that have advocated for this for years. Mwalimu Shuja talks about too much school and too little education. So this is very important. And again, school is compulsory. And so as a result of this compulsory nature, students, our children, are actually prescribed to be raped and pillaged in the school system. Not only what you mentioned about being sodomized physically with coat hangers and others, but the psychological realm as well is there. What can educators do? Let's think about this. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left in this conversation. What can educators do to make a difference? You're in education, and so am I. So what can we do?
Well, I think one of the most important things that educators can do is to use African-centered methods and to become familiar with African-centered education. There are several books that have been written. I have one now called African-Centered Education Theory and Practice that I edited with Kofi Lamoti. I think that they should get that book. I think they should get Kwame Ajayi Akoto's book, which is called African-Centered I think it's called African Centered Pedagogy. I'm going to think of the name of that. I'll get that in a second. But here's another book by Kwame Ajayi-Akoto that you should get. Sankofa Movement really has some fantastic strategies in it for how we can win the war. And then I already showed you the Maroon Within Us, Asa Hilliard. So I think that those things, and also going online and reading some of the articles that have been written about African-centered education. I've published about 30 of them. And reading them. And so teachers need to become familiar with African-centered education. The truth of the matter is there really is no other kind of education that exists that can solve the problems that our young people are having in education. So I think that teachers need to do that first. The other thing is teachers need to take themselves on a journey to transforming. This is for people who haven't done this. I'm not sure, a mix of people who've already done all this work, but teachers need to take themselves on a transformative journey to becoming an African-centered person, a Pan-Africanist, a person who understands the local and global struggle of people of African descent, so that when they're teaching, they understand that they're not just teaching a person sitting in their classroom, they're teaching the generations that are unborn, that are yet unborn, and they're teaching the people who are going to be there to fight in our struggle. The other thing is that I hope they will do is to sign up so that they can get this documentary because we're going to make it epic. The culturalwarfilm.com, and that they would subscribe so that they will know when the film is coming out. Other than that, they can go to the KA, the KA Institute, where we have a number of different resources on our YouTube page that people can engage with so that they can, so that we can begin to improve the situation for our young people.
All right, so we got it. We get in the idea of African-centered education. You mentioned the Sankofa movement. I think that is that book right there was transformative. I made sure that our children actually, my daughters were educated in the Nation House School. I thought it was so important when I went there to go visit. I thought it was so important that we actually go there and. The children were there, so I spent time with Baba Ajay.
Oh yes,
and so and also you mentioned Brother Kofi Lamote. I of course met him through the elder Malimo Shuja.
Yes.
And so I know when he was Brother Lamote was president of a HBCU, trying to bring some consciousness there, and how the school system really made it difficult for him. Yeah. And these things happen because, again, our school systems become havens or bastions of promulgating white supremacist ideology to the destruction of the minds of our students. I was in a class just yesterday talking about African Black family, and there were certain things that we were sharing about the disruption of economic development for Blacks in America, and one was about the flooding of various townships of Black people. And they now are lakes, bodies of water rest where our people used to have townships. And so they were just really amazed at this information. And one of the townships, of course, in Georgia, was the site of one of the earliest HBCUs ever. This brother started the college as well as had the railroad running through there. But the point we're making is that they were sitting there saying that we didn't know this. And the question becomes, and why? And why do you have to come to a college to get it? And why do you only have it in select spaces? Again, we have these zones that are designed to promulgate white supremacist ideology, even if we don't know consciously that is happening. We're actually doing it subconsciously. And then anything that's contrary to that is seen as a problem, which means then that they know that they're at war, but we don't know that we're at war.
Right.
Yes. You know what I'm saying? And that's sad, to be at war and not know that you're at war. Dr. Kmt, now that we are unconscious, conscious to our own needs because we think of what the white supremacists want us to do, what do you think can be done to restore back our consciousness on our culture and our own selves as Africans?
Well, I think that one of the things that we definitely want to do is watch out for distractions. Because because we have a lot of things. So if we think of ourselves as being on a historical track, literally think of a train track. We're on that track, and we're moving ourselves down the track in a way that makes sense for us. That's where we were. Now, through the dastardly deeds of some African kings and queens and leaders, but through the project of the system of white supremacy, we were knocked off of our cultural track. So we got knocked off of the track. So the train was on a track, got knocked off the track. So now we're on a different track, headed down a track that has nothing to do with us. So what happens is whenever we start trying to get ourselves back onto our track, something distracting happens, and the Europeans are masterful at this, to get us to focus on something else.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the things that we have to be mindful of. There's that, right? What we're trying to do, I've given some things that I think we can do. I've named a few books, and if you look at the reference section in those books, you'll have tons of stuff to read from now for the next 5 years.
That's true.
Right. So we have that, and then we have the film that I'm making, etc. So there's so many things that so many different people are doing, that those are the things we actually need to do. But we get knocked off track easily. We let ourselves get distracted. In education, one of the things we let ourselves get distracted by recently was the conversation about critical race theory. So what happened with that is we were moving down a track. The Europeans said, we're upset about critical race theory. So we started to, instead of centering ourselves on what we needed to do, we centered ourselves on what they were saying. So guess what happens now is that the people who are not doing African Centered education are busy trying to figure out ways to not continue to upset the white families, et cetera, who are battling against critical race theory. So we're totally distracted, just that easily. Yeah.
So I know we could go. I mean, we just got warmed up on this topic.
Yeah.
We have so much more. I am so excited. We got to do a part 2, 3, and 4. We got to talk about some strategies for success. Are there any closing thoughts that you want to leave people with right now as we get ready to move on?
Yeah, I would just say in closing that I'm going to speak once more to the issue of the distractions, and that is that if it's not about nation building, it's not about anything. Dr. John Henry Clark is one who said that. So we have to keep our minds stayed on what we're trying to do. How many times a day do you think about So our ancestors, when they were on the slave ships coming to the United States, the main thing they wanted was to return home. How many times a day do you think about returning home? However many times, if you say, I never think about returning home, then that lets you know how distracted you are from the overall goal of sovereignty. We don't want to be under the rulership of another group of people forever. So if the idea of a sovereign African people is too much, or if the idea of returning home isn't something that you're interested in, then you need to do more study. So I think that my closing thought would be, look at yourself and say, am I really thinking about going home, and how much am I considering that, and where's my mind at most of a given day? Are you totally distracted? So that's what I would leave us with, and that we need to be on a track to Sankofa.
I'm trying to respond to someone, and you mentioned Sankofa. Paige asks about the book. I'm just posting that right now. The book is called The Sankofa Movement by Kwame Ajiakoto. And so thank you so much for being here with us. We have heard from Dr. Let me get you go here. We've heard from Dr. Kmt Shockley today, talking about the imperative of African Centered education, talking about being knocked off of track, talked about we have to replace the narrative of imposition that we often operate from, to move to the centering of the narrative of African excellence. Our children must understand that they come from a legacy of greatness. We must not be ashamed of that, must not apologize for that. We must not allow the oppressor to determine what our agenda is, that we must remain true to our own agenda. And we easily get knocked off. And so we just want to say thank you for being here with us on Pan-African Leadership Conference, and continue to join us, because we will continue to have these profound discussions of African consciousness. Be a Pan-Africanist, and then everything else around you will shift. Thank you.
Asante Sana.